EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. In Chicago, thousands of students are earning high school diplomas, but showing up at the city's two-year colleges unprepared for the next step in their academic journeys. In a new project, Kate McGee of WBEZ looked at efforts to buck that trend, including an innovative program developed not by outside experts, but by the system's own faculty. She joins us now. Kate, welcome to EWA Radio.
Happy to be here.
Well, let's start with some basics. Why was this the story you wanted to tell?
So before I joined WBEZ about 2 years ago now. I was a reporter in DC, and I had been covering some stories about students who were graduating underprepared from DC public schools. And one of the strings that I didn't really get to kind of tie up and follow through was this issue of students graduating from high school and then entering community colleges, and a majority of them needing remediation. And so when I came to Chicago, when I was covering higher education, it was something that I wanted to explore here, because when I had originally done that story, I heard from teachers all over the country about how students are routinely passing and graduating high school and then entering college and really not ready for what's coming up next. So I had started to cover city colleges here in Chicago as part of my beat and met these teachers who were really passionate about this program that they had created within the English department. And so I was interested in seeing how it was working, because as we know nationally, there's all these conversations about how to better help this group of students. And I wanted to see what these teachers were doing and whether it was working for students.
There are generally two approaches taken by colleges when freshmen show up but aren't ready for freshman level work. The first is what's called developmental education, which has largely replaced what we used to call remedial education. And that's where students are retaught material in a new class that they were supposed to have mastered in high school. The second approach is called co-requisite education, where students are still allowed to take a new class, but they're given more support from faculty or perhaps outside tutoring to try to help them catch up in their skills. Which approach is being used here in these city college classrooms?
It mostly aligns with developmental education. Previously, and a lot of schools around the country have been doing this, they were teaching reading and writing separately in two separate courses. And so students would have to take a reading and a writing remedial course before they could get into, English 101, let's say. And so a lot of schools, including city colleges, were saying, hey, let's integrate these things. You have to know how to read well if you want to write well. And so let's teach these together and really increase the rigor so students are understanding what it means to be in a college level class and making it a college level like course, but really working on the skills they might have missed or need extra reinforcement from high school. A lot of the things that students coming into these classes would struggle with were like they would know of a thesis statement, but didn't really know how to craft one, or know of the 5-paragraph essay, but not really know how to organize their own ideas to be able to write one that made sense and really flowed well. And so integrating both of those ideas into a developmental class, that's kind of where it aligned with that developmental program. And then for students who were really far behind for whatever reason, they did have a kind of remedial level, but much fewer students were taking that course than the developmental class that they had developed.
So on the surface, that sounds just like common sense. Let's get these kids the information that they need without necessarily discouraging them by telling them, look, you're only going to repeat what you should have learned already. But what's the pushback here? Why is this not getting as much traction?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. One is that a lot of these classes, even though they're learning things in a course that's designed to be like a college level course, they're not getting credit for the course towards their degree, and they have to pay for it. And so the argument is that these students, mostly first generation college students, mostly students who might come from low income areas or traditionally haven't been seen on college campuses, are kind of getting stuck in these courses where they're maybe wasting time or they're wasting money when they could be maybe succeeding in a college level course from the start with some extra kind of support. And so that is why people who are looking at lagging college graduation rates across the country and looking at the number of students who start in these courses and are not completing a college degree and wondering, why is this? What's the problem? Let's try and fix this for these students who we want to be successful in college, but are clearly not being successful. And so there's been a lot of conversation about how do we solve this? How do we help students who are being placed in these developmental courses kind of get on their way faster so that they can get a degree. And so that's where this whole new idea of the co-requisite movement was born, to have students jump right into the college level course and give them some kind of extra support so that they can get on to their college degree quicker and faster and not waste money and get that college credit.
You reported that fewer than 15% of students are earning their 2 year degrees once they've enrolled at one of these city colleges in Chicago. What do you know about how effective this program is? And also, what do we know about how being in a developmental, or for that matter, a remedial class affects a student's outcome?
Yeah, I think that was the kind of stark reality. There were a lot of these teachers who have been teaching developmental education for decades and were really passionate about the program and the program existing as an opportunity and kind of a gateway for students. There's this debate like, is the developmental class the gatekeeper preventing students from being successful? Or is it this on ramp where the students are getting what they need so that they can later be successful and actually complete a degree? That's kind of where this tension is. And so with the students at city colleges, the fact is that a lot of them are not making it to graduation. And some people blame the college developmental education programs themselves. And the teachers will say, no, it's all these other things happening in the students' lives that are preventing them from getting across the finish line. Maybe they're raising a family, or maybe they're working a full-time job while going to school. Maybe they have kids, or they're homeless, or they're taking care of other family members. And so they're saying it's much more complicated than just the course that a student is being placed into. The program at city colleges was started at one of the 7 campuses about 5 to 6 years ago and has slowly been ramped up to be system-wide, and was finally system-wide at all 7 schools about 2 years ago. And so it's really early and difficult to say how well it's working, because it's been kind of this constant transition period of new things happening within the colleges as they try to help these students. The teachers at one of the colleges, Wright College, where I focused a lot of my reporting, they point to numbers that say that the students are doing well and they are seeing growth, and they're seeing more students pass English 101 and also passing English 102, which is important. It's not just about passing that first college level class. It's like, will they persist and graduate? Because that's obviously the end goal. But it's still very early, and there's still so many things happening from year to year. That was one of the biggest challenges I had, was trying to find clean data to see what exactly was working and what wasn't.
Well, how do you do that? I mean, what are you doing to sort of weigh that research, especially when it might end up being contradictory?
That was, I think, the toughest part of this story, because there has been a national kind of body of research developed from states across the country who are doing various things to completely overhaul their developmental programs. And then, of course, researchers are kind of coming in and studying how those things are going. California has made some changes. Tennessee overhauled their program, Texas, Florida. And so there's been studies coming out of all of those states as their programs have kind of gone through these changes. I think something that I kind of kept in mind for a lot of these studies was a lot of the research focuses on students who are considered on the cusp of being college ready. They're almost there. And just because, from a research perspective, it's easier to compare a student who's just below college ready and just above college ready. And it was to get that apples to apples comparison. That's where a lot of this research was looking at. And so it was showing that, yes, students who are on the cusp of being college ready, when they're maybe shifted to be put right into college level work and taken out of developmental education, they're doing really well. The thing that was difficult to determine, and that research isn't really looking at as intensely, are the students who are farther behind, who need more help, and who might not be on the cusp. And so that was where I struggled a little bit and was really reliant on data and pointing out that the research was very explicit that it was only looking at students on the cusp. And that was something I routinely saw in a lot of these stories. As states overhaul their programs and are starting to throw everyone into college level courses and giving them extra supports and kind of getting rid of their developmental education programs, we'll soon have more of a body of research to see how that's working for students who might need extra help. But it was one of those things where the research hasn't borne out yet because there's so much change happening that we still kind of have to wait and see how things play out down the line.
Kate, these conversations about remedial education and the cost and the often poor outcomes for students is often part of a bigger debate, and that is that perennial question of who really needs to go to college. You make the point in your story that some people are arguing that students who struggle in their first year of college might actually have been better off going for example, a career certificate instead of trying for a full 2 year degree. But you also point out that this is often a coded message that's delivered most often to students of color and to students from low income families. Tell us what you found.
That was something that I had a conversation with a professor who has taught in city colleges for a while, and how we hear this message kind of happening more at the community college level or smaller public universities where there is a focus on apprenticeships and programs to get students into career pathways rather than an academic pathway. Here in Chicago, the city colleges of Chicago about 10 years ago completely changed how they set up their colleges. So every college has a specialization, and those are not, English or philosophy. They're manufacturing or transportation and logistics or culinary arts. And so there are these programs that are getting a lot of attention that the students who go to city colleges are predominantly students of color, low income students. And there are teachers who are concerned about the messaging of pushing students coming in, first generation college students, and setting them up on these pathways that lead them to careers that might get them that first job. But what does that career look like for them 20, 30 years down the line when they want to have a family sustaining kind of wage? They want the students to be able to make the choices for themselves. Maybe a student wants to go into manufacturing and that's great, but they want to give them the choice that they were able to decide to do that rather than being given that was the only option. And from these teachers' perspectives, a lot of these trades, electricity, HVAC, manufacturing, these are skilled licensed trades where students have to pass tests to be able to be a licensed electrician or working in HVAC. And those require basic math skills, for instance, that some of the students that they're seeing in their classes don't have yet. And so the students still need the remediation to be able to get into those career and technical programs. And that's an aspect of this conversation that people aren't always talking about.
We're talking with Kate McGee of WBEZ about efforts to get more Chicago students to succeed at the city's 2 year colleges. This work was supported in part by an EWA Reporting Fellowship. WBEZ retained all control over the editorial content. Don't miss an episode of EWA Radio. You never have to. You can find us on your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Your support and feedback are helping us grow. Kate, just a few minutes into your 22-minute radio story that accompanies the print piece, we learn that city colleges wouldn't let you into the classrooms to actually observe some of these teachers and students at work. I'm wondering, how big a hurdle was that access problem?
It was initially pretty huge, mostly because, I had initially wanted to embed in one of these English developmental classes for a semester to see how this faculty developed course was working. And I wanted to kind of see the student growth from start to finish because I had heard from professors how, it's not really just the content that students are learning, but these developmental classes are also a lot about confidence building. And I wanted to kind of see students come out of their shell and how that progresses through a semester. So, we weren't allowed in the classroom, and they said for privacy reasons, student learning conditions. When we asked to go into the classroom to talk to students and kind of explain the project and answer questions, that was also denied. And so eventually I just decided that I would find students elsewhere and really follow them outside of the classroom. And so some professors connected me with students, and I met with a few of them and ultimately landed on the student Lewis, who I followed through the semester. And we would meet every week, every other week at the McDonald's across the street from the college and kind of just spend time together looking at his essays. I had him read his essays out loud to me. We went over his assignments. I spent time with him with his brothers at home, playing basketball, playing video games, and kind of got a sense of his life outside the classroom, which is such a big piece of this story of what's happening in these students' lives when they're not at school. So I was able to kind of find a richer story there as well. And then it also made me turn to this bigger debate that was happening in Illinois that kind of threatened the existence of this program. There's been legislation floated that would have completely overhauled the developmental program statewide. There was a lot of pushback to that. And so I was able to kind of explore that dynamic as well. So in the end, I think it worked out, but it was definitely a struggle to get to where I wanted to be for the story and get the access that I think our listeners here in Chicago and taxpayers deserve to be able to see.
I would certainly never advocate for a district to block a reporter's access to force them to find another way through, but I think certainly in this case it did work. And as one of your listeners, I can tell you it gave me a really deep sense of what some of Lewis's challenges were, not just some of his obligations, but also the distractions that can be out there for kids, and a better sense of his family and home life. So I think it was really effective.
Thank you. Yeah, I think ideally, you want to have the balance of seeing what's happening in the classroom and getting that classroom discussion, which I think I miss the most. They read a book and they had like mini book club meetings within the classroom. And that was the one thing I really was sad that I didn't get to witness, because I would meet with Lewis throughout the month that they read the book, and I kind of saw his opinion about the book change. And I wish I could have seen that in real time. But in the end, I did what I needed to do.
What can you tell us about your approach to talking with young people generally? You obviously built a lot of trust with Lewis.
I think for this project, especially when you're following someone throughout like a whole semester, you want to be really upfront with them about what the expectations will be and how much you're going to be reaching out, and immediately developing a sense of communication where they feel honest and open to be able to tell you, like, I can't meet that day, or this is too much, because I didn't ever want him to feel uncomfortable with me being around. And so I kind of laid that out in the beginning when we met initially, gave him some time to think it over. And then when he agreed to kind of let me follow him, I made sure every time that things were okay. I asked for permission when we came to his house, or even when we had a photographer come to take photos. I made sure to make sure that he was comfortable with everything. And I made sure at the beginning as well to let him know that, like, when I asked him questions, because we were going to be asking him questions about some of the struggles he had, the things that he wasn't strong at in essay writing. I was very conscious that students might feel, and a lot of students told me that when they're initially placed in these classes, they feel stupid and they feel like they don't belong in college. And so I wanted him to know that when I would ask him about that, that I wasn't judging him and that I had no judgment against him, and wanted him to feel like he could be honest with me. And hopefully that worked. And I feel like we were able to kind of build a rapport from there. But I think just being very honest with students right away about the kinds of conversations you're going to have, the kinds of things you want to be able to tag along with them and see them kind of existing in their life, being as honest and open as possible always, I think helps build that trust with the person.
You also agreed to withhold his surname, and in the photos that we see of him, it's a profile which is partially obscured. How unusual was that decision for you or for WBEZ?
Yeah, we had a lot of conversations about that because we actually do use another photo where you could easily identify him. I've had a lot of conversations working with NPR and at other radio stations that I've worked at about students who might feel okay right now giving their first and last name, but wondering how they'd feel 5 to 10 years down the road when they're maybe looking for jobs and someone Googles their name and this story still is one of the first things that pops up. And so I kind of had an initial conversation with him about that and about, I want you to consider how you would feel if you were looking for a job and someone was able to find out the fact that you were not ready for college when you graduated high school. How would you feel about that? And so he went back and forth and we had this kind of conversation, and it wasn't necessarily about being able to identify him, but being searchable on Google. And so that's why he ended up being okay with photos, but we decided to just use his first name for the audio and web story.
One of the big conversations right now around community colleges is what is their role? Is it to be the front door open access point to higher education to anybody with a high school diploma? Or should they be triaging? Should they be focusing their time and resources on students who are most likely to actually complete those 2 year degrees? How is that debate playing out in Chicago?
I mean, that's a huge debate that you hear at city colleges with all the changes that they've made in the past decade. I think that a lot of faculty are really concerned that it's becoming more of a place for students who are more likely to succeed. One instance is this STAR scholarship program that city colleges has, that Chicago public high school students with a 3.0 GPA can get free tuition at city colleges, which everyone kind of applauds as being this great opportunity. But some were worried that it was really focusing the city colleges for people who could be successful, and there wasn't as much dedication or support going to students who might end up in a remedial class or who might end up in an adult education class, who haven't been in a college classroom for 20 years and maybe are coming back and finally trying to get that degree as an adult. The faculty really believe that they are supposed to be serving the community, and they are supposed to meet a student where they're at, regardless of what struggles they might come in with cognitively or even, in their own personal lives. I think that's the concern from a lot of them when they see this shift towards career and technical education and apprenticeship programs, in which they, are the first to say there's nothing wrong with those programs and students can find a success in those careers, but they want to make sure that students have a choice. They have a choice to decide, I want to go into a career and technical program, or I want to transfer to a 4-year school. I mean, I think the reality is, for a lot of these schools, and city colleges included, is there are fewer college students today. City colleges is losing enrollment every year. They've lost a third of their students over the past decade. And so they're grappling with financial realities and figuring out how they can best serve students when they are having fewer and fewer students walking through their doors. And so I think that's kind of part of this tension too, is how do we create a product that's successful for students while also being able to be a place where students can walk in regardless of the level they come with.
What advice would you have for a reporter who might be looking at these kinds of programs in their own community college systems, whether it's remedial or developmental education?
I think that, and this is something I also want to keep exploring, so I encourage people to as well, is the connection between a local school district and community colleges and what that relationship and communication is like, how a public high school system and the local community colleges are working together, maybe where they're not working together and could be doing a better job, how the high schools are communicating to students about remedial classwork and what it is and that they might have to take it. And, a lot of students are surprised that they have to take these placement tests and they don't take them very seriously. And then they get placed in a remedial or developmental class. Maybe they didn't need to be in that class if they had worked a little harder on that test. So I think there's a lot that could be done with what high schools are doing to not just academically prepare students, but prepare them for the reality of what's coming next, just in like the systems and how college works and what they can expect from that. I think that, there's a lot of data out there about the, number of students from each high school who enroll in community colleges and need remediation, looking at that data and seeing if you can find trends or patterns, if more students from a certain high school or certain neighborhoods or certain parts of a city or state are seeing more of their students need remediation. I think, as I said before, a lot of the research is focusing on the students who are on the cusp of being college ready, but what is happening for the students who are needing much more help than that? A lot of that may be students who are speaking English as a second language, adult students who maybe never graduated high school or never went to college and are now coming back and haven't been in a classroom. And I think another thing that's a part of this conversation that I touched on a little bit is what's happening outside the classroom. What kind of conversations are happening in advising? What kind of extra supports like tutoring or writing centers are schools providing to students in these remedial classes that can help them get across the finish line, really ready to handle the academics that are going to come down the line? And also something I'm kind of really fascinated in, and I think we want to look at, is high school English curriculums. What are students reading and writing these days? What kind of writing essays are they required to write? Are they required to learn how to cite materials? One thing that a lot of these remedial classes and developmental classes are teaching students is how to, cite things in like MLA format. So what's happening at the high schools that they're not getting that kind of instruction, or it's not sinking in? I think there's a lot to do with what's happening in the junior and senior year of high school before these students are even entering and enrolling in college.
Kate McGee covers higher education for the WBEZ Education Desk and joined us from their studios in Chicago. Kate is also an EWA Reporting Fellow. Kate, thank you for making time for EWA Radio.
Thank you for having me.
And that wraps up another episode for us. If there's a story you want to learn more about, drop us a line with radio@ewa.org. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education journalists and improve the quality of education coverage. For more than 70 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, and thank you for listening.